Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on a source that presents a really rigorous foundational challenge to one of the most widely accepted ideas in modern institutional life.
Right.
We're talking about the dominant diversity paradigm, often known by its acronym DEI.
And this critique, it isn't just political.
Yeah.
It argues that the way we currently focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion can actually undermine things we'd all consider, well, non-negotiable.
Things like the pursuit of truth and structural justice.
Exactly. So for you, the listener, our mission here is to really examine how this source material scrutinizes the diversity discourse on its deepest philosophical levels.
We're not just talking about policy debates.
Not at all. We're looking at what it assumes, what makes it tick, and where the source claims it, logically breaks down. We're diving into a perspective that profoundly challenges assumptions many organizations hold as just intrinsically progressive.
And the argument we're digging into is explicit about its central point.
It really is.
It says that diversity, as it's currently implemented, shouldn't be a substitute for or, a distraction from truth or justice.
And when that focus is lost.
The critique claims the result is often just demographic arithmetic, just counting heads.
And that arithmetic, the source contends, is very easily exploited by forces that are, well, actively resisting any kind of genuine structural transformation.
Which leads us right to one of the paper's key concepts.
The link to what's often called progressive neoliberalism.
Okay, let's stop there and unpack that immediately. What does the critique mean by progressive neoliberalism in this specific context?
Well, it sets up this idea that simply changing the faces at the top, ensuring more women, more minorities are represented in leadership, can become the ultimate deflection.
A deflection from what?
From the basic economic and institutional machinery that produces inequality in the first place. So things like property law, wage structures, concentrated capital. As long as that stuff remains intact, the appearance of inclusion just serves to sort of sanitize the system.
So inclusion becomes a procedure that absorbs the social demand for change.
And neutralizes it, yes. It's symbolic recognition standing in for material redistribution.
The source basically argues that focusing on demographic composition ensures that the fundamental structures of power just stay untouched.
Precisely.
All right. Let's shift to the intellectual roots of this paradigm. To understand the critique, we really have to get what the source says is the philosophical engine driving it all.
And that engine, it claims, is something it calls anti-foundationalist constructivism.
That sounds very abstract.
It is, but we can break it down. Anti-foundationalism is the idea that there's no bedrock, no objective truth, no universal standard.
And constructivism.
That means truth is something we, build or create together, collectively. So the source is arguing this whole doctrine redefines truth itself. It all starts with the premise that there's no view from nowhere.
Meaning nobody can stand completely outside of their own identity and experience to judge reality objectively.
Exactly. Since all knowledge is fundamentally situated, it's shaped by your identity, your position in society, your culture. All knowledge is perspectival.
So truth isn't about matching reality.
No, the theory says truth is about the consensus you can achieve among all these diverse situated standpoints.
And you can see why that's so appealing. The source points out that it combines a kind of epistemic modesty, the idea that my perspective is limited and partial.
With a real moral urgency, the idea that inclusion is necessary for completeness and for justice. It just sounds like a virtuous path to better outcomes.
And that combination is exactly what leads the source to introduce its critical wedge. It's what it labels the fatal confusion.
This is key. The paradigm, it argues, conflates two radically different processes, generating ideas versus validating them.
Walk us through that distinction. How are generating and validating an idea separate? And why would identity only matter for the first one?
Well, the source gives a perfect example from science. Think about feminist biologists who noticed that male-dominated primatology had fixated almost entirely on male competition.
Right.
And they were overlooking crucial data about female coalition building and cooperation. That new perspective generated by different identities asking different questions was a huge corrective.
So they noticed something that had been systematically neglected because the field was too homogeneous.
Correct. But here's the point. The critique really hammers home. The correction succeeded not because of the gender of the person making it.
Okay.
It succeeded because of the rigor they then applied. The new insight was validated because the scientists used better methodology, systematic observation, replication, to show the old data was just incomplete.
I see. So the identity helps you spot the blind spot, but the method, the universal standard like empirical evidence, is what proves the correction is actually true.
Precisely. The method is universal. The perspective that helped generate the idea is situated. The fatal confusion is treating that situated perspective as if it's sufficient evidence of validation all on its own.
So here's the intellectual, not the source ties. If the whole paradigm rests on the idea that all knowledge is situated, how can it then claim that diverse perspectives actually improve our ability to track truth?
Right. Doesn't that judgment require an objective standard?
Exactly.
And this is the argument for self-contradiction. It's very sharp. To argue if we have diverse perspectives, we get closer to the truth, you must already possess some kind of objective, non-perspectival standpoint, a view from nowhere, to judge which perspectives track truth and which ones don't.
It's like standing inside the matrix and claiming you know what the real world looks like. You're using the system's own rules to try and critique the rules.
That's a great analogy. Diversity theory explicitly denies that those objective standpoints even exist.
Oh, every defense of it.
Every defense of perspectivism presupposes the very non-perspectival truth that it denies. The theory, as the source puts it, refutes itself the moment you articulate it.
Wow. That is a deep, logical flaw. The source gives a great practical test for this, too. Imagine a diverse committee that needs to make a critical, high-stakes decision.
Okay.
How does this committee choose between Theory A, which is based strongly on lived experience, and Theory B, which is based on experimental evidence and hard data?
The source claims the paradigm forces an impossible choice. I mean, if the committee privileges the experimental evidence, the methodological rigor, then diversity's epistemic egalitarianism is immediately abandoned.
You've just admitted that some knowledge is objectively superior, regardless of who provided it.
But if they treat both claims, the evidence and the experience, as equally valid,
Then what?
then you've abandoned your commitment to external reality. Scientific decision-making becomes impossible. The framework just can't escape that tension.
Okay, moving on.
Mm.
Let's see how this philosophical tension plays out in the real world, in actual institutions.
Yes, the source argues these contradictions really reveal the practical flaws of the dogma, and higher education is a pretty stark example.
How so?
Well, you have institutions like the University of California system implementing mandatory diversity statements for faculty hiring. The stated goal is to enhance perspectives, to improve research by broadening identities.
Okay, that sounds straightforward enough.
Yet the source notes that these same institutions often have the least intellectually diverse faculties in history.
Now that is the core contradiction. If maximizing inclusion is supposed to enhance truth discovery, why is there such a systematic ideological exclusion?
Exactly. The source gives numbers. It points out political identification in the social sciences often runs 10-to-1 progressive to conservative.
And in some departments, it's even more extreme.
Reaching ratios as high as 60-to-1. The irony is just. It's glaring. Institutions that rigorously enforce demographic inclusion targets are at the same time exhibiting profound ideological homogeneity.
So the commitment isn't really to a diversity of thought.
The source suggests it's a commitment to a specific, politically defined orthodoxy that privileges certain standpoints while actively excluding others.
And the source then brings in a really powerful, almost chilling historical cautionary tale to illustrate the danger here.
Soviet Lysenkoism.
Let's take a moment to set the stage for that.
Lysenkoism was the state-enforced rejection of Mendelian genetics in the Soviet Union under Stalin. Trofim Lysenko just rejected genetic science as bourgeois pseudoscience.
Instead, he endorsed what?
Lamarckian-style inheritance, basically, based on political loyalty and revolutionary values.
And what's so striking is that the source notes Lysenkoism met many of the criteria that contemporary diversity epistemology celebrates.
It did. It actively included workers and peasants in scientific deliberation, it challenged the dominant Western framework, and it pursued explicitly egalitarian values.
But the result was a catastrophe.
An absolute catastrophe. Lethal pseudoscience, failed harvests, famine across the Soviet Union. And why? Because epistemic authority, the standards of replication, controlled variables, explanatory power, was distributed according to political values, not methodological competence.
So the Lysenkoists won the argument about whose voices should be included, but they lost the argument with reality itself. and millions of people paid the price.
That is the analogy the source drives home. It's a warning that this pattern can be replicated when, say, federal agencies prioritize demographic team composition over methodological rigor, or when technical qualifications are subordinated to representation targets.
Competence erodes.
Competency erodes. The inclusion sounds virtuous, but the universe is indifferent to our virtue. It only responds to sound method.
Which brings us to the second major critique, the claim that diversity promotes justice. Here, the source argues the dogma confuses symbolic recognition with genuine justice.
Yes, and representation with institutional reform. This is where the critique moves from the pursuit of truth to, well, the pursuit of the common good. And it says the paradigm fails as a justice theory in 3 distinct ways.
Let's take the first one, ethical failure.
The problem here is that identity categories, race, gender, sexuality, they're fixed traits, but they just don't track normative validity or professional competence. Meaning a demographically balanced boardroom with perfect inclusion can still unanimously affirm a deeply unequal policy, like extreme market fundamentalism. The focus shifts to representing preferences, not addressing missing value claims about what's structurally fair.
So if the table is diverse, but the conversation is still only about maximizing profit, justice hasn't been achieved.
Injustice has just been diversified.
Right.
Exactly. The second failure is political failure.
Now what's it then?
The source argues that procedural inclusion becomes a substitute for substantive justice. By emphasizing identity, the paradigm fragments the idea of justice into a competition among special interests.
Every group for itself.
Right. Every demographic group demanding proportional shares, which avoids the hard political question of what a just society actually requires when values conflict.
It avoids the clash between, say, property rights and the right to subsistence.
Exactly. And the third failure is institutional failure. The source highlights that diversity programs mostly focus on measuring demographics, the surface representation, while ignoring the much deeper structural forces that are the true engines of unequal outcomes.
And this brings us right back to that original point about progressive neoliberalism.
Yeah.
How does Nancy Fraser's critique, which the text references, explain this?
Fraser argues that movements for liberation, like second-wave feminism, often shift their focus. They move from trying to transform the underlying structures that generate inequality, things like labor relations or corporate law.
And they shift to what?
To celebrating symbolic inclusion, more female CEOs, or what some people call rainbow capitalism. The faces at the top change, but the vast machinery of economic inequality just keeps chugging along.
So the core political flaw is that the paradigm fragments opposition. It turns potential structural change into identity politics, keeping the deeper questions unthinkable.
And power distribution remains unchanged. You get representation, but not transformation. And the material suggests this is functionally beneficial to the prevailing economic order. Capital stays unified while its challengers are divided by internal identity competition.
So if the source argues that diversity as it's currently practiced fails on both epistemic and political grounds, what does it offer as an alternative?
The answer it suggests isn't more procedure, it's wisdom.
Wisdom.
Wisdom, according to the source, is this necessary combination of evidence, depth of context, and moral judgment. And crucially, none of these things follow automatically from demographic representation.
Let's break down the 3 elements that make up this wisdom. The first is truth and excellence.
Standards matter. The source is adamant about this. They point to Philip Tetlock's work, his famous forecasting tournaments, which found that accuracy correlated with cognitive discipline.
What kind of discipline?
Things like open-minded thinking, Bayesian updating, intellectual humility, it did not correlate with the demographic diversity of the teams.
So the ability to change your mind when the evidence tells you to rigorously apply sound methodology, that is what produced accurate predictions, not the composition of the team.
Precisely. And when we look at transformative science, the Manhattan Project, the discovery of DNA, the source notes these breakthroughs came from small, focused teams prioritizing excellence within a shared set of rigorous universal standards.
The second element of wisdom is depth and structural awareness.
This requires leaders to see beyond the surface metrics, beyond the head count, to the invisible systems operating underneath. Wisdom means acknowledging the influence of property relations, of institutional logics, of capital flows that actually determine outcomes.
And finally, the third element is judgment.
This is the hardest one. Judgment is the ability to see what metrics miss and what procedures obscure. It involves the objective moral realization that some institutional setups are just inherently superior.
Superior in what way?
Not because they include more voices, but because they are structurally organized toward a common good. They enable human agency and dignity, rather than just being organized for profit or self-perpetuation.
The goal, then, according to the source, is not just getting more diversity at unjust tables.
It's about building better tables. Institutions built around a shared commitment to a universal notion of the common good and human flourishing, regardless of who is sitting there.
This is the ultimate synthesis of the critique, then.
It is. The argument is that the diversity paradigm fails both epistemically, because it's rooted in a self-refuting relativism, and politically, because it promotes a proceduralism that just fragments solidarity and results in stagnation.
So what does this all mean for you as a learner taking in this complex information? This deep dive has presented an argument that these failures reinforce each other. When truth becomes relative and fairness becomes just procedural inclusion, structural transformation disappears.
And the material contends that science risks descending into identity politics and merit risks being replaced by quota. The stakes, the source argues, are high.
How so?
Systems that confuse procedural fairness with structural justice may just reproduce domination until the internal contradictions become intolerable. This challenges every leader to make a difficult choice.
Perform obedience to what it calls incoherent DEI orthodoxies.
Or risk criticism by defending rigorous method, expert judgment, and the moral courage to pursue a common good.
It is a profound challenge. The source claims that true liberation needs a robust normative standard, a clear theory of what human flourishing even means, that the DEI paradigm just cannot supply because it mistakes visibility for power and recognition for redistribution. So based on the material we've reviewed, here's a final thought. Does prioritizing how a decision is made, focusing so heavily on procedure and inclusion, inherently prevent us from clearly asking if the outcome of that decision is substantively just? That's something to chew on long after this deep dive ends.